Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to your own synagogue. Thank you, first of all, to South Hampstead for hosting us here. It's such a wonderful place. I almost feel like I'm in the EU Parliament. It's almost like it was built for this. So thank you for hosting us. Thank you, of course, for the Jewish Chronicle team who've put this on. A lot of hard work has gone into this evening, so thank you to all of you for doing that, and it's lovely to see so many of you here as well. And lastly, thank you to all of you for coming along and to engage in this discussion and debate about one of the big questions facing us all as the general election looms, of will a Labour government be good for us, as it were, if and when it comes. So my name is Jake Wallis-Simons. I'm the editor of the Jewish Chronicle. And just to introduce the panel, I've got some notes on my phone. I'm not checking my email, so if you see me glance at my phone, it's because of the notes. First of all, to my immediate right, Dame Louise Ellman was the Labour MP for Liverpool Riverside for 22 years, between 1997 and 2019. During that time, she served as chair of the Jewish Labour Movement and of Labour Friends of Israel, and you're still involved with both of those organisations. In 2019, she resigned from the party in protest against anti-Semitism after a motion of no confidence was tabled against her by her constituency party on Yom Kippur. She rejoined the party in 2021 after praising Sir Keir Starmer's leadership. To her right, on the far right, or the far left from your point of view, is Josh Simons, who is the director of Labour Together, a political think tank founded to make Labour electable again, that works closely with Sir Keir Starmer and his team. He first worked for Labour as a party staffer under Jeremy Corbyn before resigning over anti-Semitism. In between, he was a fellow at Harvard University, a research scientist in AI at Facebook, and wrote a book about data, democracy, and the public sphere. So to my left, to your centre-right, Mike Katz is the national chairman of the Jewish Labour Movement. He's on the executive committee of London Labour, sits on the Daily Mirror editorial advisory panel, and is on the board of Yachad UK. And finally, on the extreme left, Melanie Phillips began her career at The Guardian before moving rightwards in the 90s when she was, quote, mugged by reality. She's a columnist for The Times and for the Jewish Chronicle, I'm proud to say, an author and a regular panellist on The Moral Maze on BBC Radio 4, and she lives in Jerusalem, so thank you for coming all the way to be with us, Melanie, this evening. Now, Lord Austin, Ian Austin, was going to be here this evening, but sadly he's unwell and couldn't make it, so he sends his apologies, so he's not here this evening. And lastly, before we kick off, I just wanted to say that scanning the crowd, I can see just one or two faces who may not yet be subscribers to the Jewish Chronicle. If that's you, then as you exit the building or exit this room, somebody will give you one of these. And this is a card which has a QR code on it, and if you scan it, you'll get a secret, one-time only promotional discount, the details of which will become apparent if you take advantage of this offer. So don't forget, for the few of you who may not yet subscribe, in fact, it probably doesn't apply to anybody, so I'll just give up with that. Anyway, so will you please welcome the panel? So, Dame Louise, starting with you, if I may, your personal journey has been one of some drama and trauma, leaving Labour because of anti-Semitism under Corbyn and returning. And in the Green Room earlier, you told me that your seat is now, although you've returned to Labour, you're not an MP, your old seat that you had for more than 20 years is now occupied by somebody from the hard left, Kim Johnson, who was forced to apologise for a speech in which she called Israel a fascist state. So can you tell me about your leaving the party, your journey back, and why you have confidence now that the party has changed?
Thank you. Well, there's an easy question to start with. I Labour really was my life. I first joined the Labour Party in the 1960s when I was, I assure you, very, very young. And I was first elected to local government, a Labour council in 1970. In 1997, I was elected to Parliament to represent Liverpool Riverside. And everything was great until Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party. The membership of my local Labour Party, Liverpool Riverside, changed dramatically. And in a very short time, it went from about 500 members to about 2,700 members. And suddenly, the meetings were besieged by, I call, the mob. And that's what it felt like. I did lots of things as an MP, lots of national things. I chaired the Transport Select Committee, was one of the national roles I had. I did lots of things locally too, but they were only interested in one subject, and that was Israel. And basically, these were people who thought Israel shouldn't be there. And they hounded me in the meetings with questions. One of them implied that I had dual loyalties. They said that how did I feel by being elected by a democratic party here in this country, but representing a foreign fascist government? I think you can all recognise where that's going. And there were other things as well said.
How did you answer that question?
I told them that was basic anti-Semitism, at which they all looked round the room and then carried on. So, there were other questions too, and if there's time anyone wants me to say more, I'll say more, but that's an example of one of them. I was harassed. I kept going to the meetings, terrible atmosphere. People would run out crying in panic attacks. I presented a written report every month of what I'd been doing in Parliament, and I answered every question. At one stage, I saw an email went round which said, I think we should lay off Israel until after the local election. She always seems to have an answer. The Times newspaper got hold of some documents which they published, and they showed an organised, highly organised momentum plot to deselect me. Names of people and the roles they had, which I then recognised what they were doing in the meetings. In a way, it was quite flattering that I mattered so much. Armed with that, I secured an investigation from the Labour Party into Liverpool Riverside. Didn't think they would come out with the truth because it was mainly Corbyn-dominated on the National Labour Party, but it did. And in the end, the report concluded, though it was never published, that I had suffered anti-Semitism. And the party wasn't allowed to meet for some time, but no disciplinary action was ever taken against any individuals. When the party then was allowed to meet again, they didn't do the open harassment, they couldn't really, and by then the strength of the Corbynites, I call them, the hard lefts, is what they were, had grown, and other people started to drift away. That's what happens when this goes on. And I noticed suddenly people didn't use my name. They looked down when I was in the room, doors shut as I was going into a room. Then I found, well, that was too, because I was told by members there was a specific person, now expelled, who organised a campaign to dehumanize me. That's what all of that was. And that went on. Again, I never stopped going. I went to every meeting and horrendous. So
that was the word that they used. It was a dehumanization campaign.
I was told, yes. Members told me about the person who did it. This person said that they were going to have a campaign to dehumanize me, and no one must ever use my name. If they had to say anything, they had to say the MP, but preferably they would say nothing at all.
And when you eventually left, did you feel like that was an act of empowerment, or did you feel like you were being driven away?
I think I was driven away. I mean, I didn't really want to go. I fought it. I exposed as much as I could of what was going on by making public statements. And being a member, I could do that. I knew a lot. I knew what was going on. And of course, that got them madder and madder. And I thought I'd just fight them and fight it out. But then there was one particularly horrendous meeting where they said that I'd been criticising Corbyn. It actually was just a Labour Friends of Israel fringe meeting at the Labour Party conference. And I've actually said he wasn't fit to be Prime Minister. So I said to them, well, yes, I did, but it wasn't anything you've not heard before. And then there was a kind of roar in the room, and they said, we don't want to talk about this anti-Semitism you go on about. We want to talk about socialism. And then I looked at them and I said, I didn't know those were two different things. Racism, socialism, part of anti-racism, socialism, part of the same thing. And I thought at that moment, I don't want anything to do with you lot anymore. But I'd also come to another decision to do with the National Labour Party. And I came to the conclusion, found it very hard, and even hard to say it now, that unless Labour lost that general election in quite a big way, the hard left and the Labour Party's anti-Jewish racism would never ever be dealt with, because I knew how the hard left worked, and that's where it was all coming from people who were hard left. And I resigned. There was the motion to a vote of no confidence in me that was down for Yom Kippur. I heard that the Corbyn's office had phoned the mover of it in panic and asked them to withdraw it, and the foolish people wouldn't. I mean, what idiots weren't they, even being told they'd better do it? But by then I'd just taken a decision, and I left.
So tell me briefly about your way back. In 2021, you returned to Labour. What gave you the confidence to return? And looking at the current occupant of your old seat, do you think that confidence is warranted?
Well, I didn't want to leave, but I knew I couldn't stay while all this was going on. And I always said I wouldn't join any other party. I was a Labour person, but I would go back if anti-Semitism was dealt with. On the day that Keir Starmer was elected leader of the Labour Party, he phoned me, and he said he was going to make this his top priority and hoped I'd come back one day. And I could see things were changing, and I saw expulsions in the Labour Party. The rules were changed on how complaints were dealt with. There couldn't be interference anymore, and the culture started to change. Now, I knew it hadn't changed completely and hadn't changed everywhere. And knowing how Liverpool politics works, I actually knew that probably Liverpool would be the last place where it was changed. It wouldn't be the first one, and I'd be waiting forever if that was going to change completely. But I could see the Labour Party was a changed party and that Keir Starmer was determined. I knew he couldn't do it immediately because, remember, he was the leader of the Labour Party, but the ruling committee of the Labour Party, made powerful by Jeremy Corbyn and given extra powers, the National Executive Committee, was still filled with Corbynites. They'd come from the local Labour parties, they'd come from the trade unions. So there had to be a way of changing those, and Starmer set about doing that, and that took time. Not that much time, but it did take time. When I could see all of that was changed, and people were being expelled, the rules had changed, the whole feeling of the party had changed, I decided that I would go back, and that's what I did. And
just last question before I move on to the next speaker. After the Gaza conflict began, don't forget, with the Hamas atrocities of October the 7th, which some people tend to forget these days, that's had a profound impact on the party. Have there been any moments in the dark of the night where you've questioned, did I do the right thing in going back to the party?
I did think... help. I mean, first was the horror of what happened. That mattered more than anything else to do with any party. And then I thought, well, what's going to happen to the Labour Party now? Is Starmer going to hold the ground? Because I knew what would happen. And a lot of these things always flared up on issues to do with Israel. There was often a deeper anti-Semitism there. Or maybe we're talking about anti-Semitic anti-Zionism as well, which is another phenomena. But I watched what happened. I think... He did hold the line. I think he has, and I think he made it clear. He was attacked for not calling for a ceasefire in those very early days. He was attacked when he didn't criticise Israel. And as you saw in the local elections, the Labour Party lost seats in areas, quite a number of areas actually, because of the Labour Party stand on Gaza. So although I can't say I've never had a wobble, and I'm still watching it, I think that Keir Starmer stood the test in terms of leading the Labour Party. Although there were clearly other voices in the Labour Party saying other things, he stood his ground as leader.
Right, we'll talk about that with Josh in a moment. But first of all, I wanted to come to you, Mike. As chair of the Jewish Labour Movement, you are embedded in the party, in the grassroots, in the thick of things. Since October the 7th, it seems to me from the outside, the party's been tearing itself apart, with Sir Keir Starmer holding this line against this increasing momentum, to use that word, from the grassroots to enforce a ceasefire and to take a more pro-Hamas position. What's it like being caught in the middle, as it were, as a Jewish member, and what are your feelings about the party now?
Thank you, good evening. But there's a lot to unpack in that question. But I think I'd start from the first principles, that I feel, and I'm not sure how many people would agree, that not so much being a Jewish member of the Labour Party or involved in the Jewish labour movement, but actually just being a Jewish person in this country feels harder and harder today. And that's something that we have to recognise, that we're at a time which, thanks to the awful terrorist atrocity on the 7th of October and how events have unfolded, we understand that actually the impact of that on the whole of our civic society and our place in civic society is under great attention. And I think it would, any institution, political party, any of the political parties would reflect that. But I do contrast that with what happened to the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn.
But if I can pause, but some parties have reflected that more than others. I mean,
Well, yeah,
it hasn't been tearing the Tories apart in the same way as it has been with Labour.
Well, not in quite the same way, but I think you can see signs at both local and indeed national level of some elements of tension. But I'm not trying to make a partisan point here. What I'm trying to say is this is a problem for all of society, whereas I think the problem that the Labour Party suffered under Jeremy Corbyn, under his leadership, was one whole around anti-Semitism, was one wholly of its own making and its own design. And we initially tried to do our part as the voice for Jewish people in the Labour Party, and to an extent the voice of the Labour Party in the Jewish community, to say to the leadership, there's a problem here, you've got to address it, you've got to take some serious action, serious disciplinary action when you're encountering some of the stories that Louise tells you could encounter across the country in different parts. And that was something that we constantly said, you've got to do something about it, and we were constantly rebuffed. We acted in good faith, they acted in bad faith. We understood eventually that they weren't in any they weren't at all interested in taking any action against anti-Semitism. They're more interested in keeping their political project on the road and not chucking their fellow travellers and their comrades out because they were being racist against Jewish people, but because they wanted to keep the band together. So that we effectively said, well, we discussed it, we decided not to disaffiliate, to maintain the formal levers of power and control that we had, but basically, come the 2019 general election, we were on campaign strike. We were very clear. There was only one or two people we were campaigning for. So my answer to you now is, what was once just an issue purely for the Labour Party, I think is a wider issue in society. And I think there has been a fundamental change in the Labour Party since Keir started his leadership in 2020. To kind of echo what Louise was saying, pretty much the first thing he said when he was elected leader was to apologise to the Jewish community for anti-Semitism in the Labour Party that it experienced under Jeremy Corbyn, and a commitment to make it right, to show zero tolerance. And if you look at the numbers of people that have been expelled, we're not talking about MPs, we're talking about grassroots members, the ones who put the pressure on MPs or make MPs like Louise's life an absolute misery if they want to campaign against, take anti-Semitic action, campaign in anti-Semitic ways. They've been expelled. The number of organisations who deny and downplay that anti-Semitism was ever a problem in the Labour Party have been proscribed. So if you want to be a member of that organisation, you can't be a Labour Party member. I could go on, but I think the depth and the breadth and the speed at which the change has happened gives me a fundamental faith that is lasting and it's secure. And if I can, because I know you're dying to interrupt me, but I'm just going to, before you get your interruption, I'm going to get my interruption in.
That's a preemptive interruption.
I don't know. Is that a new thing? My proof point for this is that the Equality and Human Rights Commission, we took the Labour Party to the Equality and Human Rights Commission when we realised the party wasn't going to do anything about anti-Semitism. And they found, eventually, the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn had broken equalities law. The very same Equality and Human Rights Commission gave Labour the green light just over a year ago. It was February 2023. They said, you've done everything we've asked of you in terms of culture change, in terms of leadership, in terms of systematic, independent disciplinary system. So, as Louise was saying, you can't just have mates deciding the outcomes of disciplinary cases, people keeping people in the party, whatever they've done, because they're political pals. All that has gone now when it comes to cases of discrimination and harassment against any protected characteristic. And the fact the ECHR has taken the Labour Party out of special measures gives me confidence that there's a kind of that there's solidity to the change. That means, yes, this is hard yards at the moment, but I'd reflect to pick up what Louise was saying, you know, the position that the Labour Party frontbench, that Keir Starmer, that David Lammy, that Rachel Reeves, the people who, if they are elected, whenever the election happens, will be occupying the great offices of state, is fundamentally now the same position as the government, which is actually, let's face it, more importantly, fundamentally the same position of the White House. And I think that's right, and it's where it should be.
Well, let me pick up on that point then, and actually turn the discussion to Josh, because there's no doubt that Sir Keir Starmer's had his character tested under huge pressure from his party over the ceasefire question over Gaza, as have other members of the shadow cabinet front bench. What are we to make, though, of the fact that Sir Keir was one of the longest-serving shadow cabinet members under Corbyn, famously campaigned to put Corbyn in number 10 on national television? I think the questions in people's minds here will include, what would Sir Keir have done if his campaigning would have been more successful and Corbyn would have been elected? How could he possibly have supported him then and yet turned 360 or 180?
360 would be a really bad thing.
Well, I think people don't really know anymore, actually, but 180 and enacted this purge of Corbynism from the party since. Can people trust the leadership, given that he was such a supporter of Corbyn in the past, and what happened to change him round?
Yeah, it's a great and it's the most important question in some ways. So I take it seriously and don't want to fob you off with an answer. I think it's important in these conversations to take a little bit of a step back because sometimes Labour people can spend hours and hours talking about the Labour Party, and to most normal people, they don't really know what they're talking about, CLPs and NECs and this, that and the other. I think it's worth saying that unlike Louise, I was not a Labour Party person, at a young age. My parents were not Labour people. They didn't have books around the house teaching me about socialism since I was a kid. And I've often asked myself over the last 5 years, why am I Labour? Why am I on this side? And, I believe in democracy. I believe in respect. I believe in freedom.
You started working for Labour when Corbyn was in power.
Well, yeah, that's right.
And how did you answer those questions then?
I didn't grow up in London. I was not a Labour member until I took that job. So to me, I'd watched a lot of West Wing and I thought, well, flipping heck, someone's offering me a job right in the start of the Leader of the Opposition's office. That's going to be a professional, serious, sort of policy-driven intellectual outfit. Lucky me. That's what I thought at the time. I was 20. And I didn't think that being Jewish
some naivety.
Remotely, absolutely, and I can't underscore how naive I was then. And my dad said to me at the time, he's a Prestwich Jew, and said, are you sure? I was like, what do you mean, am I sure? He moved down to London, knew all about Ken Livingstone and his crew. And I said, oh, don't be ridiculous, you're mad, just don't worry about it.
And when did it dawn on you that you'd made a great mistake?
When I got put in charge for a brief, miserable period, they'd figured out I was Jewish. Seamus Milne in particular had figured out that I was Jewish. And so as a 20-year-old, the only Jew in the office, they put me in charge of Corbyn's relationship with the Jewish community. And so I had to prep them for their meeting with the Board of Deputies, with Gillian Merrin and Jonathan Arkush, and the disdain with which they treated the preparation for this meeting, which was, at this point I had to go away and research all the people that he'd stood on platforms with and all the things that he said. And firstly I was like, well, Dad, shit, should have listened. This is pretty weird. And then secondly, I would put this to them in private and say, so what are you going to say? Like, what is the answer that I write? Why the hell were you on that platform? And they were not interested in that conversation.
Can you recall a specific conversation you had with Jeremy Corbyn of that sort?
Yes. The prep meeting was me, Corbyn, Seamus Milne, and we were talking about a particular platform. I'm not going to go into too much detail, and I said, so what are you going to say to Gillian and to Jonathan, who are going to come in looking for basically reassurance? And the most shocking thing actually was in that meeting, when it was supposed to just be those two, me and Corbyn, he usually would go and make flipping jam or whatever for the people who came into the office and, obsess over some tea that his wife had brought in, frankly irritating things in their own right. He didn't do that for this meeting, and instead sat sort of stony face, crossed his arms, leant back, didn't really engage at all, and, you know, almost nothing got said by him until Seamus, you know, bombed the meeting, came in and, you know, did all the conversation. I just thought, you know, I knew Gillian fairly well at this point. Here's a human being, here's a Jew looking for reassurance from a man who has power now, whether or not he realizes it, and he won't give it. And she's sitting there, you know, 2 meters opposite him. He will not give that reassurance. He won't look her in the eye and reassure.
So let me just bring you back to Sir Keir.
You took me away from him, by the way.
This was the scene. This was the milieu that Sir Keir was swimming in. This was the leader that he was supporting. These were the colleagues that he had. This was the party he was campaigning for. Explain that.
So at the time, after I'd quit that job, and then I ran away as far as I could to the east coast of America, where, you know, I was welcome and it was a great space to be for that 3 years. You know, unlike these two who were there fighting the whole time, I ran away. I asked myself that question all the time. What's he doing? You know, I'd worked with Keir on the Investigatory Powers Bill, you know, major piece of security services legislation, and I thought, you know, I know him, I know where he comes from, he's good, what's he doing? So if you'd asked me that question in 2019, I would have thought, yeah, grave error, he'll never go anywhere. But what I have since learned by getting to know him, the people around him, you know, the strategy essentially, is that he knew what was coming. And what was coming was that Corbyn would lose because, thankfully, the British public are, you know, on the whole fairly sensible and make good decisions. And the right decision at that point was to repudiate that man. I didn't leave the Labour Party, but I, you know, in no way wanted him to be Prime Minister. So Keir knew that that was the probable outcome of the 2019 election. Now, you know, you can criticise how often he was on the doorstep, what he said on TV, but he knew that the fight was coming, and that if you are a centrist Jewish person who's, you know, connected to the Labour Party, wants a centrist government to win, the only way to do that was to beat whoever came next, whoever his acolyte would be, whether he stood again, whether it was some successor who basically had the same set of values of him. Keir had to win. That was the most important thing. And if in the Labour Party you win the leadership of the Labour Party, you quite quickly run the whole thing. You can take all the reins and you can take control over the whole institution, and you can frankly smash the institution to pieces and rebuild it again. And that is what he did. And the thing that I will never, you know, apologise on his behalf for, you know, there's a good chance that he will be Prime Minister of this country in 7-8 months. You know, it's a lot less certain than lots of Westminster journalists think it is, but, you know, there's a decent chance. If he becomes Prime Minister of this country in that time period, thank God it is him and not someone else that could have been in control of the Labour Party at that point. And in order to do that, in order to do what he's done in a very, very short space of time, he had to be smart and strategic, as you always are in American politics. You start from the left and you tack to the centre. That's how you win. Politics is about power. It's an all or nothing game.
It strikes me that why he did what he did. That explanation rests upon two assertions. One is that he knew that Corbyn was going to lose. And the other is that he pretended to support him when he didn't really.
Question?
How do you answer that?
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and sort of make inferences about his motivations. It's not my job. You know, he can speak
Have you asked
for
him about
himself.
it?
He's the leader of the Labour Party. But
have you asked him about it?
To me,
have you discussed it with him, the period of when he was serving under Corbyn and what he was thinking?
I'm also not going to sit here and report private conversations with the leader of the Labour Party either. But let me just say this. I, in 2019, both thought and hoped that Labour would lose that election, as Louise has said. You know, there were lots of, like, if you had sound political judgment, you thought...
But you were in America, weren't you? You weren't campaigning for him in Britain.
I came back, you know, not to campaign, actually, to, you know, anyway, I came back.
What is that you didn't play a part in trying to get Labour
of course,
elected?
I'm not the same as Keir Starmer, and I'm not, by the way, Keir Starmer, so I can't sit here and tell you about everything he was thinking and feeling. But the bottom line is that, you know, if you believe in a centrist government, which is what, you know, he believes and what he's been arguing for in public, and you were a Labour Party MP at that point, you either had a choice to leave and throw bricks from the outside, but if you did that, you would never win. That's the bottom line, and that's how politics works. And he didn't do that, and he's won. And for that, as a centrist Jew, I am very, very grateful.
And I suppose you would say that his form in resisting the pressure from his own party over the ceasefire vote vindicates your interpretation of how he played this.
Right, and so Shabana Mahmood, most senior Muslim woman in the Labour Party, good friend of mine, her views on this question are very far from mine, to put it mildly. She is in the position of power that she's in part because she and Keir have had to have a dialogue over the last month. She is still in the shadow cabinet, despite her views on foreign policy being quite far from where Keir's are, and his capacity to lead a shadow cabinet into a position that basically tracks the US's. In fact, Biden went out before and started talking about, aid and weapons and so on. Takes great courage, takes great skill, and is a big part of, like Louise, I was watching thinking, how long is he going to hold this line? How long is he going to hold this line? And he has. And that tells you far more about courage and leadership, the whole course of the last 3 years, than any number of things he could have done during the last 5 months. Okay,
thank you. So just moving to Melanie, who's been sitting patiently and listening to all the other speakers. Melanie, I just want to push the subject forward into what we might expect from a Labour government. It looks very likely that we're going to have one in some months' time. Can you just reflect on what you've heard so far? Are you convinced, and what do you think we can expect if and when Sir Keir goes into number 10?
Well, I have to say I'm not entirely convinced that it's safe to go back in the water, as the scene in Jaws would have us believe. I would like to believe that it was so. It would make all our lives a lot easier if it were indeed so. I do think that Keir Starmer, I don't pretend to know what's in his mind or his motivation in terms of what he really believes. But I do think that he has made every possible effort to rid the party of the stain of anti-Semitism. Because, as he said, I think after he became leader, or possibly it was during the Corbyn years, I can't remember when it was, but he said, the Labour Party is a moral project or it is nothing, and that is absolutely correct. And he understands that if the Labour Party is besmirched by the stain of anti-Semitism, it is nothing. And I think he absolutely believes that, and he will do everything he can to remove that stain. But I use the word stain advisedly. A stain is something you can see. And what he's done, he's removed what we can see. He's removed the worst of it, in the sense that he's removed a lot of people, as has been said. All credit to him for that. He has been ruthless in the right cause. He has changed, as I understand it, the rules of the Labour Party to do so. That's all good. However, there are two problems with this. One is that a number of people have been left in the party, some of them in positions of significant influence, who have views which are, in my view, obnoxious and dangerous to the Jewish people and to the state of Israel when they come to power, when the Labour Party comes to power, if it comes to power. And secondly, there is another problem, which I'll come to in a moment. But just before I come to the other problem, just look at what some of the current people in the Labour Party are saying and what the Labour Party is actually doing. Here you have Kate Osamor, who was sanctioned after posting on the eve of Holocaust Memorial Day that there was an international duty to remember the victims of the Holocaust as well as, quote, more recent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and now Gaza. Now she was rightly sanctioned, and now she's unrightly back again. What's happened? She said sorry. Do we believe that? Do we believe that somebody who said that should be back in the Labour Party? Supposing somebody had said something terrible about black people, do we think it would be right for them to say, well, I'm sorry, and then bring them back again after a decent interval had passed? I think not. Here is Richard Bergen, an MP, who supported his local hate march in Leeds, quoting, "They're on the right side of history." Here is new Labour mayor of somewhere or other, Richard Parker. His very first statement as the mayor of somewhere or other was his priority. Asked about Israel's potential actions in Rafah in the coming days, he said, "I'm incredibly concerned, and I made a very clear statement they mustn't go into Rafah." Then we have our beloved Labour mayor, Sadiq Khan, who has equated Hamas and Netanyahu. Last I heard, he was still a member of the Labour Party. And now we have also John McDonnell, a reformed character who, as we know, was a wild card, a wild man in the wild administration of Jeremy Corbyn, during which time, when he was Shadow Chancellor, he said in 2012, he accused Israel of attempting a genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Doubtless, now that Keir Starmer is leader, John McDonnell is a reformed character. This is what he said on May the 7th in the House of Commons. We are on the edge of witnessing a massacre, a mass murder of innocent men, women, and children at the behest of fanatical zealots in the Israeli cabinet. We need this government to lead an international exercise to prevent this attack now. One way to prevent it is to make clear to Netanyahu that if it goes ahead, I presume he meant Rafah, this government will pursue him as a war criminal at the International Court. Well, he must be a very happy man today, John McDonnell, because he's got his wish. Put those individuals to one side. I think there is a structural problem which really does concern me, and it goes far, far beyond the Labour Party. It involves really what I would call, the progressive world. All those parties who consider themselves to be progressive. And it's this, that they support the Palestinian cause. And to me, and I know many people in this room will disagree, but to me, the Palestinian cause is constructed entirely on the desire to annihilate Israel and to appropriate Jewish history for itself. And so it's not simply a question of, are the Metropolitan Police, what I think they're doing, allowing people on the streets screaming jihad and intifada now and all the rest of it. To me, what makes people like me so frightened on the streets of London, and so that I would avoid, as I did last Shabbat, avoid one of these demonstrations with all the Palestinian flags. The Palestinian flag says to me, we want you out, gone, out of our heads, out of our lives, out of our world, here and in Israel. You, the Jewish people. That's what it says to me. And I think a lot of Jewish people believe that and think that. And so if you have a party whose the majority of whose members and supporters support this cause, I think you have a structural, fundamental problem.
And just before we open... Before I take questions from the floor, I just wanted to ask you just the last part of the question about what you think we might expect from a Labour government. How might things change in the country for the Jewish community, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure whether Keir Starmer's going to survive, quite frankly. I mean, he has got a lot of people in his party who are keeping their heads down, but who want him gone because they want a much more radical agenda. And even if he does survive, he has got a problem in that he has to reconcile his desire for Labour to be a moral party, which means that it mustn't have any truck with anti-Jewish feeling of any kind. He's got to reconcile that with the fact that he has a lot of Muslim constituents, members of parliament, members of the party, and supporters. And I'm afraid to say that a very large proportion of those people are very, very anti-Jew and anti-Israel. And who is going to have the more power, even given his desire to hold the line? The people who number approximately, 280,000 identifying Jews now in Britain, or 4 million Muslims?
Mike, I can see that you're itching to come back. So very quickly, before we go to... Have you got a very mic? So before we go to questions, would you want to make a quick response to Melanie?
There's quite a lot I'd like to say in response to Melanie, but I'm just going to focus on one little bit. I think it is... I understand why you might deploy it to support your argument, Melanie, but it's utterly for the birds to try and construct a world in which 6 months into Keir Starmer's prime ministership, should that happen, he's somehow going to be deposed by a left cabal and that are going to come back and take over the Labour Party. If that is your observation of, as somebody who's been observing the political scene for a long time, if I may, if that is your observation of the way that British politics works, the way that political parties institution works, and indeed what has happened over the past 4 years of his leadership, I think that is a misrepresentation of.
We have had quite a lot of deposed prime ministers recently.
From the Conservative Party, not the Labour Party. The Labour Party is managed to kind of, it's elected. Let's face it, much to our collective chagrin, the Labour Party couldn't get rid of a wholly inadequate leader, despite having one or more goes at it between 2015 and 2020. So I would say, that by the way was a leader that had a massive vote of no confidence against him by his own MPs, i.e. Jeremy Corbyn, and still he remained leader. So given that Keir Starmer, I think we can all agree, enjoys much greater support amongst his MPs, I think it's highly unlikely that he's going to go at any time before he wants to.
Right, okay, well let's open to the floor now. We've got Debbie with the roving mic and a hand straight up here.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, may I just interrupt you before you've even started? And not direct personally at you, but generally, as a general rule, questions, not speeches, would be fantastic. As you were.
Make it a question. I have a question about the organisation, the Muslim Vote. I'm curious to know all of the panel's opinions on the influence this is having on our politics and the Labour Party in particular.
Right, so the Muslim Vote, if people don't know about it, is an organisation supported by a number of Muslim groups, some of whom have track records of extremism, and they seek to combine votes in different constituencies based on their own agenda rather than a particular party. So, in one constituency they could advise all Muslims to vote Labour, in another one Lib Dem, in another one Green or whatever, strategically to further their agenda. So that's what the question was about. I haven't got time to go to everybody, but perhaps I'll come first of all to Josh on the end.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I would say, many layers of things. Number one, I don't think it will matter all that much in the end. Is the first thing I would say. Number two, am I concerned? Yes. Number three, I think to Melanie's point, I think Mike's right. It's actually irritatingly hard to get rid of a Labour leader. So, Keir isn't going anywhere, however much, left-wing MPs might want him to. But the deeper problem is what's happening to progressive parties all over the world. Melanie's right. There is a challenge in centre-left progressive parties, and that is related to faith and the relationship between different faith communities in the country. The really important thing to remember as a British person, as well as a Jew, is that we are very lucky in this country that governments or prospective governments have a strong political incentive to seek out the opinions of the median voter. Unlike the United States, where essentially a tiny number of people's votes matter, and so you are drawn towards a very small number of often quite polarised groups, in the UK, there are millions of voters who matter. They tend to be disengaged from politics, so not listening to the nonsense that goes on most of the time. They tend to be disproportionately economically secure, and they tend to be basically quite wise and savvy to the crap, frankly, that mostly goes on in politics. And one of the very good things that means is that these extreme wings, we have it in the Labour Party for sure. The people who are on the encampments in United States universities, now in UK universities, they are not the people that matter for winning elections. So insofar as the Labour Party, or frankly any other party, is interested in winning elections in the United Kingdom, they have an incentive not only to ignore, but sometimes to deliberately make a point of confronting the people in those encampments in order to win an election. And that, by the way, is exactly how democracy is supposed to work. So in the end, the thing I trust is not the Labour Party. I'm not going to die on a hill for the Labour Party. If the Labour Party goes mad, does what it did again, drifts from my values, I will ditch the Labour Party. The thing I have great faith in is democracy in this country. And the good thing about democracy in this country, regardless of the Muslim vote and a bunch of other organisations that are trying to seek to pull it in one direction, is that it forces the people in charge of parties to seek the consent of the median voter, and the median voter in this country remains very sensible.
Josh, can I just ask you, just to elucidate in one sentence, why it's more difficult for Labour to depose a Prime Minister than it is for the Tories to do so? In one quick, simple, just so everyone knows what that detail is.
Yeah, this is a crucial fact. The leadership of the Conservative Party depends on the consent of the Conservative Parliamentary Party. So that bloke, Graham Brady, we've seen a lot of in the last 4 years. He gets letters from people, and if a certain number of letters, 52,
1922 committee.
The 1922 committee are triggered, then they have a vote of confidence in the leader of the Conservative Party. Unfortunately, this is a problem with the Labour Party's constitution. It is very, very difficult to get rid of a Labour leader, even if the MPs of that leader do not want them to be leader. Because as we saw with Corbyn, there was that shocking moment in which it was clear that the Parliamentary Labour Party would not back the votes of its leader, and it didn't matter. And it was a miscalculation on their part to think that a no-confidence vote in Parliament in Labour would depose the leader. It won't. So it doesn't matter, in principle, if the entire Parliamentary Labour Party votes against Keir Starmer, because he's a man of integrity and who respects the Constitution. I think he would resign at that point. But that's his choice, unlike in the Conservative Party, where if a leader loses a vote of no confidence, they have to go.
Thank you. So Debbie is coming to the gentleman here for a question from the other side.
I agree that there's no chance of Keir Starmer being disposed, but my concern is it depends on the majority at the general election. At the moment, there's 40 to 50 hard-left MPs, most of them in safe seats. If Keir Starmer wins, say, hypothetically, a majority of 20, the tail will be wagging the dog and it'll be beholden to the hard left, and this is a real problem. If he gets a big majority of about 80, we're okay, 80 to 100. Anything like 40 MPs, we've got a serious problem with the hard left, and they'll be under serious pressure. Their votes at the moment don't count so much because you've got a Conservative government, but if you have a Labour government, where they're part of the Labour government, voting in Parliament, they can have serious influence.
Yeah, in fact, I was talking to a former Tory minister just today who was making that point and saying that they were hoping for, if anything, a larger Labour majority, because then Sir Keir would not be beholden to the hard left and could actually govern according to his values and principles. Louise, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, I think the answer to that question is you have to vote Labour in the big way. Make sure that we get that majority. Point made about Corbyn and the Labour MPs is really true. He rarely came to the weekly meetings of the Labour MPs called Parliamentary Labour Party. And when he did come, he'd mutter he was coming to the bastards. And that's how he saw it. He hardly had any support in it. I think, too, if there's a Labour victory, if there is, and I don't think we have to take anything for granted at all, I think Keir would be in a very, very strong position. I really do, and I think that a party, I can only talk for the Labour Party because things did change and have changed in the Tory party, but in the Labour Party, if you win an election, I think at any time, particularly after, 14 years, maybe is it more, been out of power, it's a terrific thing to do. And certainly for a long time, the leader can do no wrong. And I'm thinking back to 1997, and after 18 years, I think, then of Tory rule when Labour won. And, Tony Blair was a hero for a very long time, could not do any wrong. And then, of course, the problems of anybody governing start to come into play. So I think that Keir Starmer becoming Prime Minister, if he does, would be seen as a tremendous thing by the Labour Party, and dissent, or there'll be people muttering, I think they'd be sidelined. And I also think there's been a change on the selection of Labour candidates. And in a lot of areas, because of different rules and the Labour Party nationally getting involved in things, and as the people who didn't like it say, affecting local democracy. Well, yes, they should be affecting local democracy in this circumstance. And they have been stopping quite a number of hard-left people who think they should be the candidates and MPs actually getting selected. So it's been looked at by the Labour Party nationally as well as what goes on locally.
Now we're going to take time for about two more questions. But before I do that, I just thought, I'm not going to ask how all of you are planning to vote. But if you'd raise your hand if what you've heard tonight so far has made you think differently about how you may cast your vote.
Oh, wow.
One vote in this seat, that's going to be the swing vote, I know it.
And
This is just like a hustings.
And may I also ask for how many people here still have as big concerns about Labour coming into this as they have now as they did in the beginning? Well, we have 2 more questions, so we've still got time to... Right, 2 more questions. Over there. Yeah.
Thank you. Just going back to what that lady over there said about the Muslim vote and their 18 demands, I just wondered, I haven't heard anything about Keir Starmer's response to their demands, and I just wondered if anyone can enlighten me.
Okay. Let's take another couple of questions, maybe down here, gentleman at the front, and then we'll go up that way. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of you have spoken confidently about the how clever the British electorate is. Brexit?
Let's not go to Brexit. Let's move on. Right, another question over there. Yeah. As if things weren't controversial enough. Yeah.
Our experience under a Labour mayor is one where we don't feel safe because the police are not policing and Jews are being beaten up on the streets and there are hate marches every week. And if that's my experience of Labour, I'm afraid that makes me not want to vote for Labour. What are you going to do about the hate marches and, you know, I'm going to say something really controversial, but when I see a Palestinian flag, because I feel like I'm living in 1935 Germany, I see a swastika. That's how I feel from it. And it's a terrible thing to say, but it's true. And I think a lot of us are feeling very anxious about what the future holds. And we need a lot more than just words. We need action.
Maybe, Mike, if you want to come back on that point, you're a Londoner, you're connected to the London Council, aren't you? London Labour Group, wasn't it? London Labour...
The regional executives. I'm not actually
scrambling my words. But you live in London.
Well,
how do you respond to this?
Well, no, I completely... I'm not sure I'd go as far as in terms of what you just said about seeing a flag, but I think we all understand where you're coming from. And as I said in my opening remarks, this is extremely tense and worrying time to be a Jewish person, particularly a visibly Jewish person, however you might describe that, in the country generally.
Openly Jewish, isn't it?
Well, your words, not mine. To be around, and I feel that, and I feel that for my kids who go to a Jewish school, and it's wrong to deny that. I mean, what I could say is that there are problems with the inconsistent way in which the Met have policed these marches. Like any police force, they have their own operational independence, and I'd make that point. I mean, what I was going to say is, and I think we haven't actually covered yet, and so I was going to slightly segue with this question, is the pretext for us being here is the kind of what would life for Jewish people be like under Labour? And we're discussing one particular aspect of that, I understand that, but actually, would there be more investment in policing so that actually there could be more community police deployed in and around your streets? Yes, I think there would be. Would there be better quality of public services? Would there be a focus on economic growth? Yeah, can I just say, I know that's I'm not exactly sticking to the script of what everybody wants to talk about, but that is an issue for everybody in this room, is what would our quality of life, the performance of the economy, the quality of public services be under a Labour government compared with under a Conservative government?
All right, well, let's leave that. That's a bit more of a general point. So let's thank you for that. If we have some more questions, there's from somebody over here who I believe is called Howard.
Being in opposition is one thing, but being in the seat of power as a Prime Minister is another thing. We've seen, I think, that Keir Starmer has made efforts, won't deny that, but what I can see is that when Boris Johnson was flirting with him during the Prime Minister's question, we had Mr. Hindsight came out. And also,
Captain Hindsight.
Captain Hindsight. Also, recently in the Commons, the Prime Minister has said to Keir, why did you want law and order, but you voted against all this?
So are you saying that he's been a flip-flopper? Is that the... Yeah.
And the whole issue, the nub of the issue is that when there was the by-election in Rochdale, he didn't act decisively. And
okay,
that's the person I wouldn't want in number 10.
All right, well, let's take a few more points. Yeah. There and then in the front. Yeah.
We've talked about MPs and we've talked about CLPs. You haven't talked about the unions, and they are a very important constituent part of the Labour Party. They're totally unreformed, and both as a movement as individual unions, they're very, very anti-Zionist and arguably anti-Semitic too. So how's that part going to be dealt with?
Okay, thank you. And there's one more at the front, I think, Debbie, if you wouldn't mind.
We're regular visitors to the marches, and I'm a professional... Anti-marches, obviously. Sorry. It was a given. Yeah. Sorry. Okay.
What are you anti?
Oh, the counter-protesters.
You're pro-Israel?
The little Jews in a corner.
Right, okay.
Right,
okay.
The little Jews in a corner. Speaking to you gentlemen at the end there, AI profiling, Josh. Josh, when I'm looking at the other day, they tell me there's 15 to 20,000 people. I'm watching them all, mostly white people. I can't help but look at it and go, and I'm middle ground, so I can swing either way. They are, to me, I see them as Labour supporters. There's no way...
On the marches, you mean?
On those marches. There's no way I look at them. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying I'm a professional profiler. I do it for a living. Those are not heartland conservatives, maybe Greens for sure. What do you see when you see that? Because we're talking 15, 20,000, 50,000, 500,000 when it was peak. And all the trade unions are there as well, I understand.
All right, okay.
What are we looking at?
Thank you. Yeah, one more over here. Let's take a cluster. So you've got Rochdale, we've got unions, we've got marches.
I've got the gentleman in the blue. He paid me £10.
Good evening. You had an article in the Jewish Chronicle, I think, either last week or a couple of weeks ago, from your Israel correspondent, who made great play of what he termed Chag Joe.
Yeah. So this, what you're referring to, is Anshel Pfeffer writing to celebrate Joe Biden's contribution towards Israel's security, and he said Chag Joe. It should be a celebration of Joe. Yeah.
So my question is, how would Starmer react to this if he was in that same position where he's got a huge majority and people able to push him and bully him, and he's going to be frightened?
Right, I see. Okay. All right. Well, let's pause it there, and just we've got a few things coming at us, and so let's conclude with these points then. So we've got Rochdale, unions, marches, and Joe Biden's collapse in the face of his electorate versus Starmer. Melanie, which of those would you like to respond to?
I think I'd respond in the same... I think there's one answer to them all, which is that they are all the kind of pressure on Starmer now and when he is, or if he is Prime Minister, that I fear will take him in the wrong directions. I mean, was it Rochdale where he had the unfortunate candidate and there was an even more unfortunate result? So, you know, this is the new reformed, whiz-bang, safe to go into the water again Labour Party, and they produce a candidate like that? I mean, who is kidding whom here? It was a disaster for the Labour Party, which we've all kind of slightly forgotten. The unions, yes, absolutely correct. The unions are unreformed Israel bashers. The marchers, yes, I wouldn't say they're all Labour. I would say a lot of them are Green and points left even of Green. But basically, they are the progressive classes. And what sort of attitude would Keir Starmer take towards, if I've understood the question correctly, towards a Biden administration? Well, we can see what attitude he's taking now. Rishi Sunak, for reasons best known to himself, has moved to accommodate the new hostile to Israel Biden, uncuddly Biden scenario, which is unfolding and basically attempting to stop Israel from winning the war against Hamas. Sunak, for his reasons, has moved more to that position, with David Cameron making extraordinary remarks about Israel's disproportionate attacks on civilians, complete lies, Not only are they lies, not only do they defame Israel, not only do they weaken Israel, they increase the incitement in this country against Jews. That is the Conservative Party. A decent opposition would say, a decent opposition that really had the interest of the Jewish people at heart would say, this attitude by this Conservative Prime Minister is disgusting. That is what one would expect a Labour opposition to do, to oppose the Conservative government. That is what one would expect a Labour leader who is committed to the welfare of the Jewish people to do, to say that this cozying up to an unconscionable attitude about Israel, which is doing so much harm to the Jewish people worldwide, quite apart from in Israel itself, that is disgusting, and I oppose it. But he didn't. He moved as well. So there's not a cigarette paper to choose between him, Sunak, and Biden. So if we have Prime Minister Starmer, I think we can be fairly sure, if Biden should win the presidential election, which of course I hope he will, pause for irony to sink in, I think one can expect that Keir Starmer will cozy up to a Biden administration Mark II, just as he will cozy up to a Trump administration Mark, whatever it is, too. Because that's what Starmer does. And, you can't entirely fault a British Prime Minister for wanting to keep in with, Britain's major ally. Nevertheless, if there are red lines here, I don't think that Keir Starmer has red lines. I think his red lines are pink verging on orange, verging on yellow.
Thank you. So just to respond to that, before we're going to wrap up in just a few minutes, but perhaps if we can have a last few comments from the panel. Josh, do you want to go first in response to Keir's rainbow lines?
Sure, yeah, I wasn't sure about the colour trajectory there from red to yellow, but I think there is a serious point underneath what Melanie is saying, and I think it goes back to...
Do you want me to give you the opportunity to rephrase that, Josh?
No. A question that I think we probably agree on. And this is, I can't remember whether the question was, should you trust, as a Jewish person, should you trust a Labour government? And I think it's really important to underscore this. I say this as somebody who, was not born and bred Labour, but have become intimately intertwined with the Labour Party. Do I trust the Labour Party as a Jewish person? No, I do not trust the Labour Party. And, that it's sort of so obvious, but it shouldn't be surprising.
Wait, you're...
Well, I mean, if you listen to where the point is going, you can turn this into a sort of facile tweet, that's fine. But the underlying point is the institution of the Labour Party is not why I do my job. I'm not there because I want the Labour Party to be glorious and, to see Labour Party flags everywhere and to don things and so on. That's not, Labour Party, Schmabour Party, I care about centrist, centre-left values, I care about a set of things like democracy and freedom, and I believe that the Labour Party is the best vehicle right now to advance those things.
But you don't mean that you don't trust the vehicle that you're believing is the best way to advance those things?
I'm a Jewish person who's seen up close what anti-Semitism looks like on the far left of the Labour Party, and then when I was in the US, I came to, unfortunately, know the Trump campaign manager in New Hampshire very closely, and on the right of the American Party. I don't trust anyone. And I think you would be mad to right now as a Jew living in the modern world. I suspect most people don't trust most of the institutions around you. And I think that that distrust is healthy. What I do trust is Keir. I really trust Keir. I trust that he means it. I trust that he has lived it and grown up, around a world that understands what anti-Semitism is. And I trust that insofar as he's in charge of the Labour Party will not drift on these questions. And all the evidence that you actually have, all of what you've seen Keir do to the Labour Party, at sometimes taking enormous risks to his own political trajectory, supports the thesis that you should trust Keir Starmer. There is no real evidence to the contrary. So,
apart from a few years under Corbyn.
But the whole point about those years under Corbyn is that Keir couldn't do what he has done now
Yeah, we
without
had the-
those
we
years.
went
You know,
to that, okay.
that's
I
the
get the
argument.
point.
So I think it's quite important to ask yourself the question: what do I expect here? Do I expect a political party in the modern world? All political parties are run by extreme, small, vocal groups of people who spend their times going to meetings and doing things that most of us do not have time to do. Do I trust any of those things? No, I don't.
Louise,
do I trust the man on the ballot paper to be Prime Minister? Yes, I do.
Louise, do you trust? Do you trust Labour, the Labour Party?
Yes, I trust the Labour Party, but like...
Even after everything you've been through?
But like all people in power, all governments in power, and I was interested that Melanie castigated the Conservative Prime Minister and Conservative Foreign Minister, perhaps more than Labour, and they're the ones that are in power. There always have to be people campaigning within political parties and within governments and outside governments for what they think should be right. So I think that the last general election, Jewish people who, and others, not just Jewish people, who might normally have voted Labour and supported Labour policy, couldn't, mainly because of anti-Semitism, maybe some other things too, but that dominated it. I think that isn't the case now, and I think that if the Jewish people, like non-Jewish people, are interested in the policies of the Labour Party to make life better for everyone, there is no barrier for a Jewish person saying, but I can't vote Labour because of the anti-Semitism, because of this, because of that. I think that that is now gone. Do I think that means that everything, therefore, will be perfect and it'll all do exactly what most of us want? No, politics and life is not like that. So there need to be continuing campaigning groups, Labour Friends of Israel, Jewish Labour Movement, people with Jewish community groups who campaign for their cause like they always have to. So yes, I do trust Keir Starmer. I think Keir Starmer has shown by the stand he's taken since he became leader in the most difficult of circumstances, turning the fortunes of the Labour Party round from a party that people could not vote for, and they were right not to vote for it, into an electable party that can form a party of government. And has done that against great opposition. He's been ruthless. He's made people go. He's changed the rules. They've interfered in local selection of candidates, people who can become MPs, because he had one goal in his hand, and that was to make the Labour Party electable and deal with anti-Semitism. And issues like the massive issue that we're all looking at now, what's happening in Gaza, massive issues without simple answers. We've all got to be concerned about what's happening, but as people have said in their answers, we're not just looking at what some of the voters for Keir Starmer have said. We're looking at what's happened to the Conservative government, what they're saying. We're looking at what the American president's saying as well. This is a massive international issue, and my only hope in all of that is that when hopefully a resolution can be met dealing with Hamas and getting the hostages back, there can be some way of looking forward to some international peace that gives Israel security and not having to fight more and more wars like this. A tall order, that's what we should look for.
Thank you. So just a final word to you, Mike, of the evening. I just wondered, I mean, obviously you are a Labour man, you want Labour to win, you're going to be campaigning for Labour and so on. When you see things like what happened in Rochdale that Melanie alluded to, or Kate Osamore, which Melanie also alluded to, and other examples, do you ever have a moment of doubt?
Well, I have certainly moments, particularly since the 7th of October, where I realise truly, and this is something that we should all recognise throughout life and throughout history, that the fight against anti-Semitism is never over. We should always need to be vigilant. We always need to fight hate.
Maybe about Labour specifically.
Yes, I know, and that's within the Labour Party and without it. Can I trust an institution that can be used and abused in the way it was under Corbyn? Well, no, never fully. But I'll tell you something, and at Labour Party conference, which people may recall was just happened immediately after 7th of October, I was amazed at the response, in a positive sense, the response of people in terms of the warmth and the empathy and the human sympathy that everybody, Starmer and all the leading lights, but ordinary members and delegates and just people from across the Labour Party who are, the current mainstream of the Labour Party, who go to give up their time to go to Labour Party conference, that they held a minute's silence a couple of days afterwards, and I was on tenterhooks because I didn't know what sort of reaction. People all remember it wasn't so long ago that they held a debate on foreign affairs and they let lots of flags, and it looked like, talking about flags, it was, Palestinian flag shot, you know, and this Labour Party conference, that moment's silence, you could have heard a pin drop. And people always be, you know, the whole of the shadow cabinet turned up for the Labour Friends of Israel vigil a night or so later. And this told me that actually there had been a fundamental change for the better with the Labour Party. Now, I have, in a similar sense of Josh, I look after my own members in the Jewish Labour movement, Jewish people who are progressive and want to support the Labour Party. But it's to them that I look to understand where the direction is, and they tell me that their local Labour parties, their experience of being in the Labour Party is completely transformed from where it was under Jeremy Corbyn. And that's what gives me, as much as anything, the most trust in the direction of the party.
Well, Mike, thank you to you for rounding us off in that way. So that's all we have time for this evening. Thank you all for coming and hosting us here. Thank you again for the JC staff for putting this on. And I must remind you, somebody is very desperate to get their secret special offer. The secret special offer. Don't forget to pick it up on the way out if, in the unlikely event, you don't subscribe yet. So please, thank you, the panel, for coming, and thank you as well.